Good afternoon, Rotarians, and welcome to our meeting today. It's going to be a great meeting. We have the mayor of our fine city, and I can't wait to hear what he has to say. As we get underway, as is our norm, we're going to have Chuck Mann lead us in the prayer, followed by Phil Morrissey with the pledge. So, Chuck.
While working at an ordnance plant during World War II, a woman named Vesta Stout noticed that the way ammunition boxes were sealed made them difficult to open quickly, and recognized that this could cost precious time in battle. So she developed a waterproof, tearable cloth tape to solve the problem. Yes, duct tape was invented on this date in 1943. Now, trying to keep this topical with our speaker today, I have come up with an idea, because a lot of you know that I'm an idea guy, and I went and found some extra wide duct tape. Also comes in white and yellow. We have unemployed people in the city. We have duct tape, and we have roads that need to be repaired. So, Mr. Mayor, there is my contribution to the problem of duct tape. Thank you. Let us pray. God, thank you for Mayor Kapszukiewicz and all those who are in elected offices that govern the city of Toledo. Guide them to make wise decisions which are always in the best interest of our community. We also pray for those who are in local law enforcement. Please help them to have concern for those that trust them, compassion for those that need them, and send them home safe to their families each and every night. In your name we pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This week, or actually this month, our February sponsor is the Toledo Club. I'd like to thank Kathy Mikalajic and Jeff Anderson for that. I don't know if you're out there, but if you are, thank you very much. Who is welcoming visiting Rotarians?
Well, I don't think, we don't have she's here, sorry.
Okay. To give the mayor more time, we'll pass on welcoming visiting Rotarians. Let me just say, all of you who aren't normally here, welcome. And Karen Rainey, I'm especially glad you're here. Are there any Rotarians, visiting Rotarians? Then let's move. Floor mic announcements. Max, where are you? Max Reddish. Yeah. Well, I was really hoping that you were going to make an announcement of some sort. Are you having new babies? Are you having babies, or did you graduate from high school? What's going on?
Oh, no, but my 2.5-year-old just got done potty training, and she's tinkling in the potty almost every time. Thank you. Thank you. We're very, very proud. I suppose what I'm supposed to be reminding people of is euchre tonight. 7 o'clock at the Toledo Club in the Red Room. $5 gets you at the table. It's always a really good time. So we'll be done by 9. Contact me if you have any questions or if you'd like to join. We'll be there. Thank you.
So the Toledo Club, 7 tonight, euchre.
That's right.
And do you need a reservation, or can you just show up?
You can just show up. Well, I think we only have about 8 players tonight, so it's going to be a smaller group. We had 24 last time. Everyone's welcome, though. If you want to walk in, we'll be there.
Well, if anybody's free tonight, I can tell you it's a lot of fun. I was there last time, and it was great. Great time.
Glad you had a good time.
Anything we missed, Max?
I think that's about it.
I'm looking forward to hearing the report of your daughter?
Yeah.
Of her graduation.
Yeah, and my 3-month rolled over, so that's big news, too. So, big times in the Redditch household. Thank you.
Thank you, Max. I just have one announcement today, and it's to talk a little bit about polio, what happened last year. You know, it's the biggest thing that we do, and in many ways it's the biggest thing we ever have done. Our total number of polio cases in the world, all of them in Pakistan and Afghanistan, was 173 for all of 2019. Now, we've been going backwards somewhat, but it's certainly a lot better than 1,000 cases a day, which is where we were when we started. In addition to that, I need to report that we have 7 cases so far this year, all of them in Pakistan. And sadly, I have to further report that towards the end of December, we had 2 murders of guards looking over our polio vaccinators. That's not the first time this has happened. Again, it's in Pakistan. Again, it's in some of the toughest places in the world. And if you would, keep in mind that those people have families, the people that were murdered have families, and that they were doing a job that we asked them to do. So if you keep them in your prayers, that would be great. Kathy, would you come to the floor, Mike? Or to the podium?
Thank you, President Tim. I have a few announcements here. I'll try not to go on too much, but first and foremost, I got a call from Murph today. I think everybody knows him, and he hasn't been here for a while. He said to say hello to everyone. He had recent knee surgery, and he said he's been doing therapy, had to get to 90 degrees, and he's at 111 degrees. I think that means the bend. So he'll be here on the 24th, but he can't drive. I offered to pick him up today, but just wanted to let you know how Murph was doing. 2, Abby gave me this. We don't know whose notebook this is. So if anybody wants to claim it, it says the Deco Group on the front, hashtag getting great. So we've had it for a while, and I told Abby I would hold it up. A couple of announcements I want to make, please. 1, letters were mailed out Friday. I put them in the mail Friday that would outline, if you don't already have a receipt, your 2019 contributions to the Toledo Rotary Club Foundation. If you made a contribution during the Black Tie Affair, I also made a note on that. You may already have a receipt for that. If you have any questions or you disagree with the amount that I put on that letter, please let me know. It was a process to get them out, and I just wanted you to know if you didn't get it Saturday, it should arrive today. Next, Abby Mortimer Sachs, as most of you should know by now, is the new club administrator. But I hear that many of you may not be getting the spoke, you may not be getting evaluations, and I think it may be because if you don't have her email as one of your contacts, it may be going to spam. I don't know if that's what it is, but Walt's put the slide up there. Her email is asachs@toledorotary.org. So if you'd please add that to your contacts, then that might eliminate that challenge if you've been having it. The next, I just want to go over a couple of things that are just office related that would be so helpful for everyone. On our website, Walt, can you go to the next slide, please? At the top of our website, and Walt's done these great arrows for me, it says member info. And I know we have greeters, we have people who do the pledge. If you would click on that, you'll get a drop down that'll take you to, Walt, the next slide, to Sign Up Genius automatically. And it will take you to this point, and again, you have to click sign in, but you don't need to know a password or anything. So if you would just please remember that this is there, because then once you hit that button, Walt, if you would go to the next slide. Yeah, just log in. It's all set up, so you don't need to do anything. And then the next slide will actually take you to the options that we have set up for you in Sign Up Genius. I don't know if some of you have been here, some of you have not been here. It's not that slide that you're seeing right now, but just so you know, you sign up to be a greeter. If you want to sign up for a program that is scheduled, you may be the facilitator, the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'm not sure what else is there. Pledge, yeah, I can't read that far. Reflection, other items. Just know that it's there, you as members. That way you can sign up, pick the date that you want, and it's automatically sent to the office. And this is how we schedule things on a Monday. And last but not least, because I've noticed that our attendance records look like not very many people here, and I know you're here, the scanners. I know it'll beep when you put your barcode under that, but just remember that it needs to turn green. So if it beeps and it's not green, your attendance didn't get scanned. So we go back to the office, and then we manually try to remember who was at the meeting. So a lot of you are getting missed, and that's important to us as a club so we can kind of run a percentage and figure out who's engaged, who's coming to the meetings, who's not, who attended a committee meeting. So just know that those scanners are there for you, and it does need to turn green. So thank you very much. Thanks, President Tim.
Marie White, how are you today? You have to come up to the microphone. If you don't speak into the microphone, Walt yells at me after the meeting. So how are you?
Hello, I'm good.
Okay, I'm so glad about that. Walt, how am I doing? Okay. What are you doing up here today?
I'm introducing a friend.
Okay, and a good friend?
Yes, a wonderful friend.
Why don't I leave you to it?
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. I am delighted to introduce you today to my friend Joe Blackburn. This is Joe. Come here, Joe. Joe has worked in the insurance industry in many roles for several companies over the course of her career, including Medical Mutual, Aetna, Marsh and McLennan, which is an independent agent, and American Family Insurance, which is how we met, and currently where she's employed as the sales district area leader for this region. Jill met her husband Ray through her son Stefan at a youth mission trip where Ray was one of the leaders. 10 months later, they were married, and 9 months later, they picked up their lives in Cleveland and moved to Madison, Wisconsin, where they both started working with American Family Insurance. They just celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, and she says it's been a fantastic whirlwind. Her son Stefan is a scholarship volleyball player at Lourdes University and a total cutie pie. The Blackburns love to travel, predominantly to Europe or on cruises to Alaska, the Mediterranean, the Baltic Sea, and the Caribbean. And Jill also enjoys snowboarding, volleyball, water skiing, and spending time with her family. One thing that some of you may know about Jill, if you attended the Rotary Polio fundraising event at Axe 419, is that she's an amazing axe thrower. She had never done it before, and she killed it. So if I were you, I wouldn't get her mad at you. Her pet peeve, like mine, is slow drivers. Please help me welcome Jill to the Toledo Rotary.
Jill, would you step up to the microphone? You throw axes?
Yes, I love it.
Okay. Did you have your husband with you?
No.
Okay. Did you warn him?
Yes.
Okay. How many friends do you have?
Many.
Many. Do you have 400?
No, but I am glad to have now 400 new ones.
You now have 400 new ones. You also have 1.3 friends around the world.
3 million.
Sorry.
Just 1.3.
No, 1.3 million friends around the world. This is a very large organization. And if you participate in it, if you fully immerse yourself in some of the things that we do, I assure you, you will have friends for the rest of your life. I have a pin here somewhere, which is says to the world that you are a Rotary member, and our roster. Welcome to the club.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to our speaker a lot. I've heard him speak in the past. He generally says nice things about Rotary. We're going to hope he does that again today. I know that he's interested in I'm sorry.
Privilege, a point of privilege. First of all, I hope that Kathy remembers all of us on any given day.
Say that again.
First of all, I hope that Kathy remembers all of us on any given day. But when she goes to office on Monday, she should remember all of us.
Okay. We'll do our best. We have a great speaker today, and to introduce him is our chairman of the program committee. He's been doing a great job this year, and I'd like to welcome to the podium Bob Savage.
Thanks, President Tim. So February here is unofficially dubbed Mayor's Month after last week in Neil McKinnon. And if we need a sub later this month, Tim Pedro, Mayor of Waterville, you're going to be up. The first thing I want to say actually has nothing to do with the mayor or today's program. But I know that there's a push here to have more members join Rotary. And I think it was 2 weeks ago that all of us filled out cards and put them in the center of the table. And I wasn't asked to do this, but I would make a suggestion to all of you. In addition to giving a card that someone else on another committee, myself included, I don't sit on the membership committee, will call. All of us probably know somebody who might belong to Rotary, and the more people that reach out, the more people join. So if you want to put on your agenda sometime this week when it fits in to ask somebody, that'd be a great thing to do. So Mayor Wade Kapszukiewicz probably doesn't need a very big introduction. He's not going to get one today. He started his schooling career at Regina Chaley off Lewis Avenue in North Toledo. Made his way to Marquette University and the University of Michigan for his master's degree, where he finished top of his class in both. He tells me that the Marquette Warriors or Eagles? They're the Golden Eagles now. Maybe seen in the AP Top 25 basketball poll soon, or at least that's his hope. He spent time on city council and then the treasurer beforehand. I think that's, the treasurer in particular, a great background for the mayor, where he's paying attention to the finances, which obviously are important, and also gives even better business perspective. And I've known him long enough to know that he has great appreciation for how important business is in this town. But background aside, one of the things I've always liked the most about Wade was his values as a person and his willingness to stand up for what he thought was right, even if it wasn't necessarily popular. And I think we've seen that a few times already. Being the mayor is probably not all it might seem to others, and we all know lots of our jobs aren't as fun as other people might think they are. But the mayor in particular, and Romulus can probably sympathize a little bit, is not a fun job every hour. But he knew that before he signed up. And as much as there have been some great things done in the first 2 years, and he absolutely has some, I think, outstanding accomplishments, which he certainly did not do by himself, city council and several members here. And he's got his good staff working behind him. But there are some problems in the city and some things that need to be addressed. And some things that, as generous as that was, Chuck, duct tape might not finish or fix. A little bit more here and a little bit more there probably aren't going to fix either. There are some major problems that might not affect us or some of us in our daily lives, but do need to be challenged and do need to be addressed. And one of the things I admire about the mayor is he's not afraid to step in and try to tackle some of those problems. I think a lot of good things have happened in his first 2 years, and he's a lot to be congratulated about, but he'd be the first one to tell you that's not enough, and he's here to do more and push the city forward. And with that, we give a warm Rotary welcome to Wade Kapszukiewicz.
I did not know that duct tape was born 77 years ago today. I did know that my father-in-law was born 77 years ago today. I'm not sure if there are any attorneys in the audience or maybe some attorneys who may have gray hair, but my father-in-law is John Weglian, who some may know. I was a county prosecutor for years and years, an attorney. since I didn't know to prepare for this, I don't really know what the link is, other than I'm sure that when God helped my father-in-law make his way into the world 77 years ago, he knew that his love of talking would be such that maybe someone needed to invent duct tape, so that together we all would be able to enjoy John Weglian's stories a little better. I have to say, before we dive into my remarks, your intrepid leader, Tim, I assume you know, is from Canada, originally from Northern Ontario. And he greeted me today in a way that only a Canadian would, because in Canada, and though this seems like a joke, incredibly enough, it's true, to the extent Canada is, still part of the British Empire. If you go up there in Toronto, every road is Winston Churchill Boulevard and Queen Elizabeth Park. So they really do have remnants of the old class system, let's put it. So their mayors, without exaggeration, are referred to as your worship. Now, I am not one for titles or honorifics. There is only one person in this world I ever tried to get to refer to me this way, and my wife just won't. I don't know. Not that she never uses the title, but it's usually those dishes aren't going to do themselves, your worship. That lawn's not going to mow itself, your worship. So, at any rate, thank you very much for the invitation to be here this afternoon. I don't know how many of you had the chance to either attend or view my State of the City address last week. I hope not too many of you did, because otherwise the next half hour to 35 minutes may be similar. Although already looking at the clock, I realize that I already have 15 minutes less to work with today than I did last week, so I'll try to be succinct. What I want to talk about, though, is where Toledo is, where Toledo has been, and perhaps where it's going, depending on the choices that we make here in the next couple weeks. Toledo is improving, and that's not a shtick, that's not a campaign slogan. It really is the case that Toledo is improving, and whether you feel it intangibly when you're down here going to a ball game on a Friday and you see the lights and the parks and the stadiums and the activity, or whether you, like me, are governed by data. In either case, it is undeniably the case that Toledo is better off than it was this time last year, this time 3 years ago, this time 5 years ago, certainly better than this time 10 years ago. What I mean? I can zip through some of these quickly. Crime is down, substantially down. Now, we struggle with gun violence in Toledo the way every big city in this country does, but crime is down 7% year over year, and last year it was down 10%, 18 over 17. We're not where we want to be, but that is one metric that shows that we're making progress. 3 years ago, we couldn't afford to resurface one single residential road, not one. Yet in 2018, we resurfaced more miles of road than any time in the last 20 years. That's progress. We have accomplished some pretty big legislative things. The regional water agreement is, I don't know that there was anyone who thought we were going to be able to pull that off, but we did pull it off. That's an example that shows that we know how to govern, I may submit, and that we have an approach that involves building bridges and solving common problems together. That is progress. I mean, are you kidding me? We've been fighting over water in this region for 60 years. Now we're not. And since we've learned how to cooperate with one another on water, I'm hopeful we can do so on 911 and public transportation and economic development and maybe regional fire, all the other things that we need to do to make our region competitive. That's progress. We weren't in this situation 3, 4, 5 years ago, but we are now. Our economy, though not ever what we want it to be, is certainly better than it's been in a long time. We're third in the country for cities our size in economic growth, according to Site Selection Magazine, which, while I am leery of quoting rankings too often, because I know that, heck, we're never We're only just one ranking away from being 80th in the prevention of rickets or something idiotic like that. I will say that Site Selection Magazine is the Bible of the economic development crowd, and so it's notable that we have the strongest economy, third strongest among cities our side in the entire nation, and the strongest in Ohio. Our unemployment rate is low. You might say, well, the national unemployment rate is low. It is, but we are now tracking just 0.5% behind the state unemployment average, and that is historically low. That's progress. And if there's nothing else we're making progress on, and Bob alluded to it, I will say this, and I'll say it till the last dog dies. We are in a much better financial position than we were when I became mayor, and then when we were 5 years ago, we were 10 years ago. When I became mayor, we faced a $3 million budget deficit. 2 years later, we have a $17 million surplus. For much of the last 10 years, City Hall has only been able to balance its budget by literally robbing Peter to pay Paul, by taking money out of the capital fund and using it on the general fund. This was a power that the voters gave City Hall in the worst of the Great Recession in 2009. And for 8 of the last 10 years, City Hall couldn't balance its budget without doing that. And yet, in the last 2 years, not only have we not had to transfer a penny, again, we have a surplus. That is progress. 10 years ago, we had a negative $14 million rainy day fund. Well, how the heck can you have a negative rainy day fund? Here's how. You have no money in the bank, and you pay the debt you owe to Bob by taking money away from the debt you owe to Tim. That's what a negative rainy day fund was, and that's where we were not too long ago. Today, we have a $24 million rainy day fund. None of this is to say that we're where we want to be. None of this is to spike the football in the end zone and say, hooray, we win. But it is to say we are making progress. We absolutely are. I can't imagine anyone taking issue with that statement. But, and by the way, most politicians stop right there. And the balloons fall, and the confetti falls, and the band starts playing. But that's not responsible, in my judgment, because the goal isn't just making people feel happy, just so I can tiptoe through next year and get reelected and, do it. Look, if the goal was to do what's easy, if the goal was to simply do what's easy, my speech would end right now. But that is not the goal. The goal is to make our community the sort of place we all want it to be. And I did not run for mayor to be something. I ran for mayor to do something. And we have a chance right now. We don't always get these chances, but we have a chance to build on the undeniable momentum we have and to turn that momentum into something sustainable. All we have to do is do what other successful cities do. That's all we have to do. We're making momentum, but yet, why do I say that we're not where we want to be, or that we're not at the finish line yet, or that it's not time to spike the ball in the end zone? Well, here's one reason. 81% of kids in the city of Toledo, when they show up to day one at kindergarten, have already failed the state assessment for readiness. That's the worst percentage of any big city in the state of Ohio. So in other words, on day one of kindergarten, not at the end of your educational journey, but on day one, on your first day in class, when 4 out of every 5 kids who go into day one at kindergarten aren't ready to be there according to the state of Ohio, of course it's going to be harder to educate that child, and the graph between their achievement and their peers will only get worse and worse and widen as they get older. That is why the work that the Rotary has done on pre-K and early childhood is so valuable. That is why, frankly, your financial support is so appreciated, and that is why we're going to continue to need to engage with the Rotary to make sure that that one statistic can be corrected, because it is one of the things that is preventing us from being the city that we know we can be. We have parks in the city of Toledo. We have 130 parks. We have 73 ball diamonds in those 130 parks, and yet only 28 of them are playable. That means 62% of the parks that you might, 62% of the ball diamonds that you would find in a city of Toledo park, heck, I might call it a ball diamond. You know what it really is? A backstop surrounded by weeds. When 3 out of every 5 ball diamonds that you encounter in our parks are backstops surrounded by weeds, we can be happy about the progress we've made, or we can say, that's not the city I want. Our finances are so much better than they were. I just talked about how we went from an absurd negative rainy day fund to a $22 million rainy day fund, and yet we have the worst bond rating of any of the big cities in Ohio. What does that mean? It means that when we borrow money, you have to pay more on interest than your peers in Columbus or Dayton or Cincinnati or anywhere else. We have, it is true, we did in 2018 resurface more miles of road than any time in the last 20 years. That's a true statement. And yet, last year, we filled 162,000 potholes. Where did that number come from? We counted them. We typically fill potholes on a complaint basis. Someone in Point Place calls, we send a crew out and fill it. Someone in East Toledo calls, we send a crew out there and fix it. We got to a point last year where I felt that while a certain amount of potholes are always going to be with us, in the snow belt, rust belt, and it's not just Toledo, Chicago, Boston, they all have them, we had a few more than I thought was appropriate. And so we took crews off of alley cleaning, I took some crews off of sewer work, and for 6 weeks we said the heck with it. We're doing nothing other than filling potholes. And the way we did it, literally driving up every road of the city, there are 1,100 roads in our city. We drove every single one, up one, down the other, across this one. Doing it that way, which we had never done before, allowed us to do something we had never thought to do. And that is literally count the potholes. We basically said, drive the streets of the city, when you see a pothole, fill it. We thought they'd find 50,000 potholes, but they didn't. They found 162,000 potholes. So, are we making progress? Sure. And by the way, the progress that I listed at the beginning of the speech, I'm an elected official. I could have gone on for 2.5 hours about how wonderful we are and how much progress we're making. But I don't think anyone's thrilled with 162,000 potholes, or kids who are least prepared to learn, or the worst bond rating in the state, or 3/5 of all ball diamonds really being weeds, backstops surrounded by weeds. And I didn't even get into the 59 tennis courts we have, 30 of which are unplayable, and the 45 basketball courts we have, 23 of which are unplayable. Didn't even get into that, but trust me. Are we making progress? Yes. Are we satisfied with where we are? No, I'm not. So as you may have picked up through the extemporaneous numbers that I have stuck in my brain and have regurgitated out to you, I don't do anything without thinking it through and without researching it and without putting a little thought to it. So I reflected on where we are and how we got here. Yes, it is true that Toledo has lost population over the last 50 years. I was born in 1972. In the census of 1970, Toledo had 383,000 people. Today, we have about 280,000 people. So we've lost 100,000 people in my lifetime. But I said to myself, that's not unique to Toledo. Whether you call this part of the world the Snow Belt, the Rust Belt, the Great Lakes region, everyone in this general area has lost population. And it's true. You can see the massive population shift that began probably in the late 50s, frankly, and now has manifested itself to the point where Texas and Arizona and Florida and California and Georgia and the Carolinas now have the population maybe that we used to have in the 50s. So that can't be it, because, well, maybe it snows here. Maybe it's because it snows that people in business don't want to be here. I don't know. It snows in Boston, too. It snows in Chicago, too, and in New York and Milwaukee and St. Paul, so it's probably not that. Well, we've been hit hard by plant closures and job loss. Whether it's, and this is not a time for politics, so whether it's globalization, bad trade deals, who cares? The fact of the matter is, factories and investment have left this part of the state, and moved to Arizona and Texas and California and Florida. But not just Toledo. Same thing happened to Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Detroit and every other city. What is it? What is it that what links these cities? Well, I said to myself, maybe. Maybe, do you know what it is? Maybe it's our labor costs, okay? I'm open-minded enough. Maybe the cost of labor here is so high that when you are a business person looking to invest, you don't want to face the high labor costs or the occasionally creative ordinances that city councils in Toledo may advance. And so that has made our city so business unfriendly that it is causing people to not invest here. And actually, if you drew the line at the Mason-Dixon line, you might be onto something. Because I do think historically, labor costs south of the Mason-Dixon line are much lower than they are north of the Mason-Dixon line. So we are probably at something of a disadvantage when you stack ourselves up with Atlanta, Tampa, Austin, Nashville, et cetera, et cetera. But north of the Mason-Dixon line, how are we any different than Columbus and Cincinnati and Chicago and Boston and New York and Pittsburgh? Not only do all of those cities have labor costs just as high as we do, in most cases, they are higher. Columbus, Ohio has a higher rate of unionism than they do in Toledo, and labor costs are almost twice as high in Pittsburgh as they are in Toledo. And yet Pittsburgh went from a drizzly gray steel city when I was a kid to a city that now hosts G7 summits. How did that happen? If unionism and labor costs are some great sin, they're facing that sin. There's twice as big a problem in Pittsburgh as there is here, and yet look at that town. So, I don't think that's it either. What about public education? I see Dr. Duran over there. I know that public education has its hands tied in Ohio because of the unfair and literally unconstitutional way that public education is funded in the state. And so recently we saw TPS receive a higher letter grade than it had been getting. But for the last couple of years, it received a letter grade that none of us would want to get. Here's my point. Of the there are 8 major urban public school systems in Ohio. I think they call themselves the Big 8 or the Great 8. Okay. The letter grade that Toledo Public Schools gets, 7 of the 8 got the same letter grade. Okay? Here's my point. I think the grade card is bogus and unfair and silly. But whatever role the challenges of public education present us here in Toledo, they literally present the exact same challenges to these city leaders in Columbus and Cincinnati and Dayton and Akron and the rest. Are there challenges that our public educational leaders face? You bet. And they are identical in every other city in this state. And yet, while we have lost population, 100,000 people over 40 years, and those other cities have too, here's the biggest difference. Every one of these other cities has started to turn the corner and add population again, except us. We're getting better. We're making mincing steps of improvement, but we are losing population at a faster rate than any other big city in Ohio. Obviously, Columbus is exploding, but Cincinnati is growing again. Dayton isn't growing, but it's stopped losing population. Akron, we're almost the exact same city as Akron, let's be honest. We play in the glass bowl, they play in the rubber bowl. It's the same city. They're growing. They have the same snow, the same labor costs, the same challenges with public education. What is it about us? What is it? If it's not labor costs, if it's not those evil unions, if it's not schools, if it's not snow, what is it? Why has everyone else turned the corner and not us? Now, we're not in reverse, but we're spinning our wheels like a hamster. Why? What is it about us? What is it? I would submit that what makes us different, unfortunately, vis-a-vis our peers, is that we systematically fail to invest in ourselves. We fail to invest in ourselves. The city of Toledo spends less per capita than any other big city in the state of Ohio. Not by a little bit, by a wide margin. We spend less than any other. Are you okay? You're going to start crying? I do. I was going to, trust me, when I saw these numbers, I was going to start crying too. Less on roads, less on cops, less on fire, less on infrastructure, less on parks, less on everything. Want to hear something even more sobering? There is a plan to invest in ourselves in a way that successful cities do. It's called Issue 1. It'll be on the ballot 5 weeks from tomorrow. When Issue 1 passes, we will still be last in the state in per capita spending on roads, cops, fire, parks, and infrastructure. That's how far behind we are. We are that far behind. It might not feel this way, but after passing the 0.75% tax in 1982, and then having never touched it for 38 straight years, we are the lowest, our citizens face the lowest income tax of any big city in the state, by a wide margin. And that's fine. There is a real benefit to having a low income tax. There is a benefit, but it explains why we invest so little in ourselves. So let me just talk about one example, parks. We spend $41 per citizen on parks. Well, what does that mean? That just sounds like a nerdy number that I have stuck in my head. Put it in context. Well, $41 per citizen is half of what they spend in Columbus, half of what they spend in Cleveland. It is 1/5 what they spend in Cincinnati, but it's even worse than that. The overwhelming majority of what we spend our small parks budget on, 83% of our parks budget, what do we spend it on? Youth recreation leagues like they have at Paysutter Park in Sylvania? Soccer, stuff for kids? Nope. 83% of what we spend on parks is spent mowing grass. So move to Toledo, we mow a mean blade of grass. Is that all we want? Is that all we want? It's not what I want. I know what I'm proposing here. And I know that this ain't the easy thing. The easy thing would be to put my head in the sand like an ostrich and do what the 10 previous mayors have done and keep on kicking that can until I just make it past my reelection and everyone pats me on the back and says, yeah, okay. Okay, that would be the easy thing to do. This is not easy. I know what country we live in. I am an American, which means I am conditioned to hate taxes. I hate taxes. We are all descended from revolutionaries who so hate taxes that on a cold Boston night in 1773, I'm melting under the hot glare. On a cold Boston night in 1773, they met at the church, put makeup on their face to make themselves look like Native Americans, and they poured boxes of tea into the harbor to protest how much they hate taxes. I get it. Americans hate taxes. Hooray. But the citizens of Columbus, Ohio, are also Americans, and so I assume they hate taxes too. Yet in the midst of the Great Recession in 2009, on the same day that the citizens of Toledo were voting to give their city hall the ability to rob Peter to pay Paul, the citizens of Columbus were passing a package identical to Issue 1, which is going to be on the ballot 5 weeks from tomorrow. Not similar, not, hey, it was the same thing. And you know what they did? They passed it. How has the city of Columbus suffered and been penalized for the sinful, dastardly, and un-American deed of daring to raise a tax? Well, they are only the fastest growing city in the United States of America, north of the Mason-Dixon line, east of the Mississippi River. Because, in fact, people do not move out of communities because of some theory of tax that Milton Friedman wrote about at the University of Chicago in 1942. They move out of Toledo because when bad things happen, cops don't show up as quickly as we'd like. And oh, by the way, we have 162,000 potholes. I love low taxes. But if low taxes were the magic potion to growing a city, we'd be New York City. We already have the lowest taxes, and we had for 27 of the last 30 years. Meanwhile, and I saw Tom Mackin at an event earlier this morning, you know which community has the highest taxes in our region? Not by a little bit, but by a lot? Perrysburg. And they might be our most successful city. They invest in themselves. Columbus invested in themselves. I believe we need to invest in ourselves. I know this. There's no other way to do this. I know what some of you may be thinking. Well, I know you're wasting money. You have to be wasting money, I just know it. You spend too much. Okay? For that argument to make sense, because every organization I have ever run, the highest number one expense was personnel. And sure enough, the city of Toledo, our highest number one expense is personnel, otherwise known as police and firefighters. So for that little voice in the back of your head that assumes that we're just a bunch of, dumb, drunk union Democrats wasting your tax money, for that to be true, we'd better pay our police and firefighters an awful lot of money, or else your argument doesn't make any sense. When in fact, a Toledo police officer makes substantially less than a Perrysburg police officer, a Sylvania police officer, an Oregon police officer, and who do you think has a harder job? We don't pay our employees too much. Here's something else you might say. Well, geez, I know there's fat that you should be able to cut in that budget. To which I would say, cool. There is fat that we can cut. I would like to think that the way we went from a $3 million deficit to a $17 million surplus in my 2 years as mayor is that we have cut an awful lot of fat, but if you have another idea, I'll take it. Well, that fire department seems pretty inefficient. Their shoes look a little shiny. You're spending too much on shoe polish. It's because you buy that shoe polish from Tom Brady and everyone knows that his product is too expensive. You should get it from Tom Palmer. It's cheaper. And to that I'll say, good, I love it. We're going to fire Tom Brady, and we're going to hire Tom Palmer, we're going to save money on shoe polish for our fire department. Great. I'll do you one better. Let's eliminate the fire department. Let's eliminate the whole thing. We spend $76 million on our fire service. That's what we spend every year. You have to admit that spending zero on our fire service is better than just saving a couple nickels on shoe polish or whatever dumb example I just came up with. Let's outsource the whole thing. We'll spend nothing. Not even that. Not even freeing up that $76 million in our budget will provide us the resources we need to invest in ourselves. There is no cutting down on paperclip abuse that is left to do. We simply have a decision to make. Are we going to be happy with baby steps of progress? And you know what? Maybe we are. And if we are, that's cool. That's okay. There's something to be said for wearing the little participation ribbon that says, I live in the lowest tax city on planet Earth. That's cool. Or are we going to fix our problems? Because you can't do both. You can't. Issue one will invest in ourselves in the way that successful cities invest in themselves. It will raise $22 million for general fund objectives, such as growing the size of our police force by a net of 100 officers over 5 years, such as providing the ability to have Toledo join the rest of the grown-up cities in our state and offer universal access to pre-K for every 4-year-old in our city. By the way, we are the only city that doesn't do that. Every other city has already done it. Some cities have been doing it for 20 years. We're the only city left that does not, as a matter of course, provide universal access to pre-K to all of our 4-year-olds. Every other city does so by putting the full burden on the taxpayer. That's not what we contemplate. We do contemplate a role for the taxpayer through the passage of Issue 1, but we think that the private sector should play a role, and it will. So this model is a hybrid funding model between public and private. What sort of private philanthropy might you see in this area? Again, looking over at Dr. Durant, I think a lot of us were moved by what happened a couple Wednesdays ago when we had a donor from Chicago, doesn't even live here, came in and wrote a $3 million check to send every kid at Scott High School and a parent to college. That is a significant game changer for those individuals, and that is the sort of thing that this public-private partnership can do. So we're going to need people like Pete Cadens, we're going to need the ProMedicas, we're going to need private philanthropy to step up. But unlike every other city that does this, we contemplate the public having a role, and when Issue 1 passes, we will. There are many things that this does, but I want to get to the question part where you can tell me that I'm an idiot and taxes are bad and you have a little shrine to Milton Friedman in your kitchen. So I will simply say that I saved the best for last, and that what we will do more than anything else with this levy is that we will, not with duct tape, but with actual asphalt, fix the roads of the city. When I said that we resurfaced more miles of road in 2018 than any time in the last 20 years, that was true, and we spent $9 million doing that. Under this levy, we would spend $40 million a year, every year for 10 years. That is quadruple the world record amount. Let me say it a different way. 2019 wasn't as good a year for our road resurfacing program, so we couldn't afford the world record amount of $9 million. We fell back into what is a more typical program of about $4 million. What the passage of Issue 1 would mean is a literal 10-fold increase in the amount of roads that we resurface, not just 1 year, not just the next year, but every year for a decade. Let me say it one last way. Regardless of how much we spent, we ended up resurfacing 1.6 miles of residential road last year, 1.6 miles. When Issue 1 passes, we will resurface over 70 miles a year, not just next year, not just the year after, but every year for a decade. That's an almost cartoonish 45-fold increase in the amount of residential roads that we fix. Let's fix the roads, for God's sakes. This will do it. I won't use this exact same campaign slogan that Gretchen Whitmer and Mike Ferner have used in recent years, but this will fix the darn roads. This will make the sort of investments that successful cities make. At the end of 10 years, we will have fixed the roads of our city. We will have joined the rest of the developed world in providing access to pre-K for our 4-year-olds. We will have 100 more officers on the street, and dare to dream, maybe we'll have some ball diamonds that really aren't backstops surrounded by weeds. The final part of our plan, I think, might be the most significant. The citizens of Toledo passed the 3/4% income tax in June of 1982, and every 4 years since, they have renewed it. They have never failed to renew it. They've never increased it, which is why now, after 38 straight years of doing it the same way, we spend less than every other city by far, and even when we pass this, we'll still pay less. That's what happens when you lock yourself into a rate, when you lock yourself into a Ronald Reagan first-term rate and never increase it like other cities have done. They've never increased it. There was one proposal, there was one time where they were asked to do it, and that was 2016. It was 4 years ago. And there was a fundamental difference between that request and what we're doing 36 days from today. 4 years ago, when City Hall tried to do this, and I wasn't mayor and I'm not blaming anyone, it was a different time, the citizens essentially asked, okay, I get it. We haven't had a dorky mayor count them yet, but I'm sure we have a lot of potholes. I am prepared to make peace with the fact that maybe you need some more resources from me to help fix our roads. But can you promise me that these new resources will go to fix the roads? In other words, can you promise me that you won't do what you've been doing for 10 years, and that is robbing Peter to pay Paul? Can you promise me this money will go to fix the roads? And you know what? They couldn't make that promise. They couldn't. And the voters responded predictably. What we are doing is different. When you vote for Issue 1, you're not only voting to fix 45 times more residential roads every year for a decade. You're not only voting to spend 10 times the amount on roads every year for a decade. You're not only voting to grow the size of our police force by a net of 100 officers, giving us as many officers as we've had since 2003. We'll have 700 officers, haven't had that in 20 years. You're not only voting for the funding to do all those things, you are simultaneously voting to require that we spend the money that way. It is written into the ballot language. So you don't have to trust politicians like me when we say, oh, trust us, we'll spend it on the roads. With your vote, you will be requiring that this money must be spent on roads. It is literally written into the ballot language, and I think that is a aspect that could help us build the trust needed from an understandably skeptical public and their leaders to make sure that this important resource is spent the way that they want it to be. This is an important moment for Toledo. We can be satisfied with the progress we've made, and we are making progress. But we understand that even with all the progress we're making, we're last in the state in child readiness. We have the worst bond rating in the state. We got 3/5 of all of our ball diamonds that are unplayable, and we got 160,000 potholes. Maybe that's okay. Maybe you're happy with that status quo. I'm not. I think Toledo could survive if we limped along on the path that we've been on for 38 uninterrupted years. We'd survive. But geez, is that all we want? Move to Toledo, we'll survive. I want to thrive. And to do that, we are going to have to do what other successful cities have done. Every other city has done this. Most of them have done this 10, 15 years ago. It's the only thing about us that is different than our peers. Snow's here too. There's labor costs here too. Public education's a challenge, but it is in Columbus and Pittsburgh and all those other places. Why have they turned the corner? Because they made tough decisions. We will do it too, but you don't have to trust that we'll do it right. Your vote will literally, legally lock us into doing all these important things, not the least of which is a program that this organization cares deeply about, and that is achieving the goal of universal access to pre-K for every 4-year-old in this city through a vessel called Hope Toledo, where a board of directors will take the money that comes from the levy, will take the $2 million that comes from the private sector, and essentially people will apply to that board for grants to be able to allow their child to go to any one of the several dozen existing pre-Ks that already exist in this city, and provided they are at least a 3-star in the state's rating system, they'll be able to send their kid there. That's what successful cities do, and that's just one example of the sort of thing we can do if we support issue 1. So, I may have gone over time, but I still think there's time for people to yell at me, and I know you want to get to that. Thank you.
I'm sure we have questions. Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor, for your kind and informative talk. I was also in attendance at the Toledo Club a couple weeks ago when you and Pete Cadence made that presentation, which was also very informative. I think most of us would agree that in the past, there's been a credibility issue running around town on some of these issues.
I agree.
I don't think that's any secret. Would you give the citizens before the election a written pledge, point by point, amount by amount, or percent, whatever it is, of where each dollar of this levy would go to, and then each year be subject to an audit by an independent citizens committee that I will pick and I will pay for?
Okay. Well, the answer is yes. Actually, we already have enunciated where every penny is going to go. In the interest of time, I didn't want to get into it. It's on our website.
You can send it to me after the
Okay.
meeting or next week. I'll look forward to receiving it from you.
Okay. And again, the key difference is here, you don't have to trust us. With your vote, you will be requiring that this money gets spent.
I know, but the people would feel more comfortable with receiving something in writing, special, and then realizing, and then I think you should publicize to the citizenry that there will be this special annual independent audit. And I think that's a road to success.
Thank you.
Mayor, could you comment? Apparently, we have two valid ordinances dealing with lead paint, the one that the Court of Appeals reversed, and then the later one passed by council. Could you comment on how you see that playing out going forward?
Is this on lead paint or the
The
drywall?
lead paint ordinances and controlling that.
We know what the road to hell is paved with, and I think there are a number of I have never doubted the sincerity or goodwill of any ordinance or any councilman who has written any ordinance in terms of achieving the objective that they desire. My worry with the lead ordinance remains the same worry, and that is that that the initial ordinance was written not too quickly, but maybe incorrectly, and that it only applied to certain units. And if lead was a big problem, Why are we making peace with the fact that kids could be lead poisoned when they go to grandma's house because grandma owns her home, and homes aren't covered under the ordinance, but only if they are lucky enough to live in a 2-unit dwelling. So those were my biggest concerns. I also think that in some ways it painted with too wide a brush. Here's the analogy I used, and talking to, again, we brought everyone together, and we have landlords and the real estate community and the Board of Realtors sitting down with pastors and other health advocates. There was such debate and discussion over the subject of these dust wipes. I'm not sure how involved all right. One side wanted dust wipes to be used in every single case, and the others said, well, if you do that, it will create such a cost and a burden that the ordinance isn't workable. The analogy I used is that of how police officers approach drunk driving. If police officers pulled over every motorist driving down Summit Street, every single one, 100% of them, they would catch a drunk driver eventually. They'd have to. But that's an inefficient use of resources. That's not how the real world works. In fact, what police officers do is they hang off to the side. That is when we're not using unconstitutional and unfair laser things that you guys don't like. But they set up to the side. Good, applause. All right. What they do is they park their car to the side and look for evidence of drunkenness. So they don't pull over every car. They pull over cars that are sweeving or going too fast. And that is a more efficient use of the resource. That doesn't solve the entire problem. Yeah, there may be drunk drivers that somehow make their way through because they're not swerving, but it is a reasonable compromise. That is where I felt the lead ordinance failed. That instead of applying it to every single property, which is inefficient and too unwieldy and too expensive, we should apply it where there was evidence of lead poisoning. And so it was, I think the difference of opinion I had with City Council was played up a little bit. I think our motives were we're coming at it, we wanted to get to the same location. I felt that they had crafted a well-intentioned ordinance that just fundamentally couldn't be implemented. Now the Supreme Court has spoken, or actually the appeals court has spoken, and now I believe we're on a trajectory where we are going to go back, not to the drawing board, but we're going to have about 6 months to try to work some of these issues through. And I think we will get to something resembling the police vis-a-vis drunk driver model, which I think is the right way to go. I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah.
Mayor Wade, just a quick comment really to maybe wrap things up. I really appreciate where you're coming from. I get where you're going with all of this. I don't think I have to point out the least civic-minded, the largest whiners in the region are not in this room today. You know where they are. They're out flaming people on the blade. They're out running their own blog spots. And you're not going to reach them. I just want to wish you the best of luck on behalf of all the region in getting your message about Issue 1 out to everyone else in the community.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate that. Look, reasonable people can disagree. And people who disagree with me are not only are they not bad people, they're not even necessarily wrong. They just have a healthy difference of opinion. Looking around this audience, I've been talking to so many people about this over the last 9 months. There are a handful of you that we've had this conversation and we just disagree. So it's okay. That's how democracy works. It's fine. It's okay. So it's not a question of good versus evil or right versus wrong. I believe that this is the step that the city has to make to become the sort of community we want it to be. Other people disagree, and that's okay. You know what we'll do? We'll have an election, and we'll see what the voters come up with. And you know what? If it passes, that suggests one course of action. But if it fails, okay, we'll pick ourselves up the next day and dust ourselves off and try something else. I have said all along that we're going to try things. We're not going to sit around and twiddle our thumbs and let the world just pass us by. We're going to throw stuff at the wall, and some of it's going to work and some of it isn't. And if this doesn't work, we'll try something else, because I do believe that the status quo is not sustainable for us. We're making little tiny baby steps of improvement, and that's great. But I think all of us want to make more, and that's what has motivated me here in this case. My guess is you're standing next to me because the time is up.
Thank you, Your Worship.
I have to introduce you to my wife.
That was a great speech. It was very well presented. I thought it was extremely interesting. And to thank you for your presence here today. We have gifts.
More duct tape?
More duct tape. We have historical tales of Toledo, which I'd like to give to you. And thanks for being here. Also, we will make a contribution in your name to our Polio Plus Fund. And with that, we will save some children. So thank you very much. We have, before I close the meeting, we have a Finance Committee meeting at Presque Isle today. We have the membership development in North Cape. We have no meeting next week because it's President's Day. I don't understand why my picture isn't up there, but no meeting next week. The following week, we have Jillian Bunge, who is going to talk about the 911 connection. It should be very interesting. And with that, we are adjourned.